The proposal, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said he intends to bring it up for a vote at a time to be determined. Here's some of the debate from yesterday, starting with Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa.
Mr. President, I rise today to join over 10 colleagues to speak in opposition to the so-called Green New Deal. Merriam-Webster defines a deal as, quote, a bargain or an agreement for mutual advantage. By its name, you'd think that Americans are going to derive some benefit from it. But this couldn't be further from the truth. The truth is, this proposal is a raw deal for America, especially our rural communities. As many of you know, every month I give out a Squeal Award, which draws attention to outrageous examples of wasteful and reckless spending of taxpayer money. With a $93 trillion, trillion dollar price tag, which is roughly $10 trillion more than the entire recorded spending of the United States government since 1789, this month's Squeal Award goes to the Green New Deal, which again, I think is kind of a raw deal. Just think about that number, $93 trillion. To fund this radical government takeover, every American family would have to pay about $65,000 annually. And folks, that's more than most Iowa households bring in a year. The ideas presented in the Green New Deal used to only garner support from the furthest fringes of the political left, the furthest fringes. Concepts like rebuilding every building in the country, outlawing fossil fuels, and guaranteed jobs would never have made their way into mainstream discourse just a few years ago. Now our Democratic colleagues are trying to make them mainstream. In fact, 100 of the 282 Democratic members of the House and Senate have signed on to the support of this plan. This is the creep of socialism into America. If you work in a part of the energy industry that's fallen out of favor, your job has no place in the country. That's what is envisioned by the Democrats. The Green New Deal states that one of its goals is to meet, quote, 100% of the power demand in the U.S. through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources, end quote. And don't get me wrong, folks, don't get me wrong. Increasing our reliance on renewables is a good goal and one that I support. But we have to be realistic about our current energy capabilities and our needs. Private sector investment and innovation, coupled with government support and incentives, has contributed to significant advances in renewable energy. I'm proud to say that my home state of Iowa is one of the nation's leaders in renewable energy, with wind providing nearly 40% of our electricity, more than any other state in the nation. With more wind coming online, coal went from producing 76% of our electricity in 2008 to 45% of it in 2017. And I would note that this transition towards renewables happened largely as a result of state policies and community engagement, not heavy-handed government regulation. Another one of the goals I find most interesting in this unrealistic proposal is that of providing, end quote, again, guaranteed jobs, end quote. What may be lost on the Democrats is that the best guaranteed jobs program is not housed in a government building. It's a strong economy like the one we're living in right now, not one bogged down by job-killing regulations and punitive tax rates. If you want proof of this, look no further than Iowa. Our unemployment sits at a low 2.4%, and we have over 63,000 job openings and about 40,000 folks looking for work. That's more job openings than people actually looking for jobs. Lastly, I would point out that as a part of this proposal, our Democratic colleagues want to overhaul transportation systems in the United States. If you live in places like New York City, you can walk to a grocery store. But in rural communities like my hometown of Red Oak, Iowa, it can take you 30 minutes to drive to a Walmart. And I'm not talking about city traffic 30 minutes driving to a Walmart. I'm talking about 30 minutes driving, probably not meeting any cars at all on the road. Everything from combines to tractors and to the trucks that transport our grains to market would be impacted. The Green New Deal is unrealistic and would unfairly impact rural communities across this country. So, folks, we have a clear choice. We can continue to support rural America and pro-growth economic policies that boost our economy and create jobs, or we can allow socialist fantasies like the Green New Deal to creep in, take hold, bankrupt our nation, and devastate our rural communities. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor to my colleague, Senator Cornyn.
Mr. President.
The senator from Iowa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator from Iowa yield to a question? I'm interested in whether or not she believes that climate change is real, caused by humans, and requires federal action.
I will yield. I do believe that climate change is real, and we have seen climate change for centuries, Senator Schatz. So for my colleague from Hawaii, we have seen climate change. There is no doubt about that. But what I am debating here today and what we are speaking on is right here. $93 trillion, where we want to get rid of all fossil fuels within 10 years, folks. 10 years. We can't drive a combine. We can't harvest our food. For heaven's sakes, we have to be realistic. And my home state of Iowa has taken advantage of ingenuity and innovation and developed a process where wind energy contributes 40% of our electricity. Now, with the new wind energy field that's being put in by Mid-American Energy in the western part of the state where I'm from, in the next 2 to 3 years, 80% of our electricity will come from wind energy. And it didn't take big government or socialism to put it into place. So thank you very much. I yield the floor to Senator Cornyn.
Could I, Mr. President, may I ask a follow-up question through the chair?
Mr. President, regular order.
The senator from Iowa has yielded the floor. to Senator
President.
Cornyn.
Because I just would like to get clarification. She did say climate change is real. Like, my question is whether man-made climate change is real. And I did not get an answer.
Regular order.
If she's unwilling to answer that question, I understand.
Regular order, Mr. President.
I yield the floor.
The senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, last week I spoke on the Senate floor about the perils of socialism. I never thought in my entire life that I would have to do something like that. But given the rise of democratic socialists, which obviously is a contradiction in term, I think it's important to remind the American people about the failures of socialism, as well as radical policies like the ones the Democrats are trying to push off on the American people. If you want to know what command and control economies are and what it would mean to our freedom and our liberty, all you need to do is look at the Green New Deal. This is really nothing more than an attempt to mask this power grab by the federal government in feel-good environmental policy by mixing ideas like Medicare for all and guaranteed jobs with unrealistic economic and environmental policies.
Would a colleague from Texas yield for a question instead of just filibustering what he says?
Mr. President, I would.
Senator from Texas has
I would
the floor.
yield for a question after I conclude my remarks, not to be interrupted.
I would simply want to ask the gentleman if he
Order,
believes
Mr. President.
climate change is
Senator
real,
from Texas has the
caused
floor.
by humans.
President.
We know what he's not for. What is he
The
for?
senator will yield. The senator from Texas has the floor.
Mr. President, I'm not for socialism. I'm not for Washington, D.C. thinking they know better than what my constituents know about
Would he
how to
yield
run
for
their
a question
lives.
and say
I will
what
not
he is
yield.
for?
I will not
The
yield.
Not
senator
what he's
from
against,
Texas.
what he is for.
The senator will be in order.
Mr. President,
the senator from Texas
Mr.
has
President,
the
if
floor.
the Democratic leader will just
He
be
declines
quiet,
to yield.
if he'll be
Senator's
quiet for a
recognized.
minute, I'll tell him what I'm for. If he'll quit interrupting. So what this is an attempt, it's really a power grab here in Washington, masked as feel-good environmental policy, mixing ideas like Medicare for all and guaranteed jobs with wildly unrealistic and radical environmental policies like zero net emissions transportation systems and guaranteed green housing. Since this resolution was proposed, it's gained the ire of people on both sides of the aisle, something we don't see that often, and something that I don't know if I've ever seen. One of this bill's authors referred to the majority leader's intent to bring this resolution to the floor as sabotage. Now, ordinarily, when you introduce an idea in the United States Congress, you are begging the majority leader to put it on the floor, the committee chairman to put it through committee so you can advance your idea. But when the majority leader said he would do that to the Green New Deal, it was called sabotage. Since the Green New Deal was rolled out, things in Washington have gotten increasingly wacky and, believe it or not, even crazier. We recently put a price tag on the Green New Deal. You heard the senator from Iowa talk about the $93 trillion. That's so much money, I doubt that most of us can wrap our brain around it. It's kind of like if somebody tells you the Earth is 140 million miles from Mars. How do you conceptualize of that? You have no point of reference to understand just how far that really is. But let me put it this way. If you combine the gross domestic product of every single country in 2017, every single country on the planet in 2017, the price of the Green New Deal would be higher than that. If you totaled up how much the United States has spent, the U.S. government, since the Constitution went into effect in 1789, the price of the Green New Deal would still be higher. If you total up the value of 1 year's worth of oil and gas production in Texas, it would take almost 7 centuries of production to pay for the Green New Deal. Margaret Thatcher, who had a gift for words, said, "The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money." Well, in this case, you don't even have the money to begin with, but that's what this is really about. This is the antithesis of what our founders believed in when they founded the U.S. of America, the United States of America. They believed that checks and balances and separated powers were a protection of our individual liberty and our right to make decisions for ourselves and our families. They view the concentration of power that would be necessary to do something like the Green New Deal as the opposite, the antagonistic to individual liberty. And so, Mr. President, things like eradicating air travel clearly aren't the answer.
Mr. President,
we saw
I'd
our
like to
friend,
ask
the
a
senator
question
from
about the
Hawaii,
chart.
say that that wouldn't work very well if you tried to get to Hawaii from Washington, D.C. No matter what your perspectives on energy are or the environment, I think every one of us can single out something we can agree on, and that is smarter policies that won't bankrupt our country. The solution is not the Green New Deal or another government power grab. It's all about innovation,
Mr. President,
and the creativity
Mr. President,
of Americans doing research and science to
Mr.
come
President,
up with new and
Will the
innovative
senator
solutions to
yield
our
for a
problems.
second? The senator from Texas has the floor.
Mr. President,
He has declined to yield.
I would just seek to be recognized to just ask the senator if he knows that the
cannot be
$93 trillion
recognized.
number comes from a Koch brothers
senator has-
funded organization.
The senator from Massachusetts will suspend.
This-
The Senate will be in order. The senator from Texas has the floor.
Mr. President, I've noticed one thing when people around here, colleagues across the aisle, don't like what they're hearing, they try to suppress or drown out dissenting voices. I think the American people need to hear this debate because our ability to innovate is critical to the success of our economy and our competitiveness in the global economy. Investing in science and technology and increasing our ability to innovate is an important part of keeping our economy strong. Rather than the government seizing control of nearly every industry, over-regulating their activities as you would under the Green New Deal, we should harness the power of the private sector to drive real, affordable solutions. And that's how we find cutting-edge solutions to our biggest challenges. A lot of folks try to paint with broad strokes about energy. You're either on the side of innovation and new technologies, or you're in favor of traditional oil and gas development. Well, I'm proud to come from a state that believes truly in all of the above approach. We generate more electricity from wind than any other state in the country. And we believe in all of the above. You don't have to pick one or the other. Not only do we lead the nation in oil and gas production, we also lead, as I said, in wind energy production too. We're proof that you can implement policies that get government out of the way and leave industry experts to do their jobs. You can be pro-energy, pro-innovation, and pro-growth. The Green New Deal is not the answer to our problems. It is a solution in search of a problem. And it is a naked power grab by Washington, D.C., seeking to impose on each and every American how we should run our lives. It is the opposite of the individual liberty and freedom that our founders believed our country would be based on. I hope in the coming months we'll take steps to promote freedom and not more government control, and ideas that lead to innovation, not socialist policies.
Mr. President,
I yield to my,
Mr. President,
my friend from Indiana.
my colleague said he'd yield to a question after he finished debating. I would like to ask him a question.
The senator's recognized.
I would like to ask my colleague a question. I appreciate that. Just three. Number one, does he believe that climate change is real? Does he believe it's caused by humans? And does he believe this body ought to do something about it? I appreciate an answer.
Mr. President, I would say to my friend from New York that I know what their talking points are now, but I don't believe that what we ought to do about the environment is impose a travesty like the Green New Deal. This is a government power grab. It's unaffordable, it's unrealistic, and really this reflects the most radical ideology and fringe of the Democratic Party today. So I think we should not have a socialist power grab of our entire economy.
Would the gentleman, Mr. President, would he yield for, he didn't really answer my question, what would he do about climate change? I'd ask my colleague to please answer not what he's against, but what he's for. We have not heard from the other side of the aisle anything they're for about climate change, or whether they even believe it's real and caused by humans. So I'd ask my colleague once again, not what he's against, we know what he's against. What is he for?
Mr. President, there's a great book called Super Freakonomics, written by some Chicago economists, that talk about the threat to the environment of horse manure, back when we'd had horse-drawn buggies in our cities because the internal combustion engine had not been created. They point out that that environmental hazard went away almost overnight because the internal combustion engine was created. Likewise, when I was growing up, a scientist named Paul Ehrlich from Stanford wrote a book called The Population Bomb. He said that millions of people would starve across our country and across the world unless we basically quit having children. And so what he miscalculated is the impact of a gentleman by the name of Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution that he began due to research and development of an innovative plant gene research. And so we were able to basically defeat the population bomb, and we were able to deal with the environmental hazard of horse manure by innovation. That's what I'm for, that's what I said, and that's what I would say again to my friend from New York.
Mr. President.
Recognized from Indiana.
Mr. President, I rise today in opposition to the so-called Green New Deal. This unaffordable, unattainable, and unrealistic proposal is bad news for all Americans, but it's especially bad for the people who live in my home state of Indiana. Indiana is the most manufacturing-intensive state in the country, and my Hoosiers are rightly proud of that distinction. We make America's planes, our cars, our trucks, our recreational vehicles, our boats, our pipelines. We produce the aluminum and steel that goes into these products. We mine the coal that makes it affordable to power all of those factories. Indiana's home to these respectable, high-paying jobs because of the highly skilled Hoosier workforce, our world-class infrastructure network, and yes, our low energy costs. But the Green New Deal would crush Indiana's affordable energy prices, forcing the cost of doing business to skyrocket for Hoosier manufacturers and farmers alike, eliminating jobs in the process. So what would this Green New Deal mean for American families? Over the next decade, this so-called deal would cost up to $65,000 per American household per year. Now that's roughly 50%, 47% more than the median Hoosier household income. Now, yes, America must continue to support an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and I look forward to working in a bipartisan way to get that done. We must continue to develop renewable energy sources like wind and solar. But we must also continue to utilize our important baseload energy sources. This is your coal, your natural gas, your nuclear power. We simply cannot afford to eliminate these critical sources from our nation's energy mix, and that's what the Green New Deal would call for. In Indiana, approximately 92% of our electricity is generated by coal and natural gas. 92%. Wind and solar account for just 6% of Indiana's electricity. And they cannot reliably and affordably produce the electricity that Indiana needs. So instead of turning a blind eye to coal and natural gas, energy sources that power America, let's continue to incentivize research and development. Instead of promoting job-killing legislation like the Green New Deal, we should be promoting proposals like the Use It Act. This is bipartisan legislation put forward by my colleague from Wyoming that would promote carbon capture research and development.
Mr. President, we yield for a question.
We agree on the need to incentivize market-based carbon capture systems.
Mr. President, will the senator from Indiana please yield for a question?
I would like to continue until I complete my remarks. I thank my colleague.
The senator declines.
We agree on the need to incentivize market-based carbon capture systems that ensure America can continue to cleanly and affordably produce baseload energy. And by my reckoning, this is just one of many areas in which Republicans and Democrats can find common ground and work together to protect God's green earth. Indiana is an environmentally conscious state. We continue to expand solar and wind production each year. We love to protect our important natural resources like the Indiana Dunes and Hoosier National Forest. But we cannot support a proposal like the Green New Deal, which would endanger tens of thousands of Hoosier jobs. The Green New Deal is wildly out of touch with Indiana's priorities. Hoosiers know a bad deal when they see one. This is a bad deal. And my fellow Hoosiers are gravely concerned that this radical proposal will cause utility bills to skyrocket and force Indiana factories to shutter. So for these reasons, I am a resounding no on the Green New Deal. I stand with Hoosier farmers. I stand with Hoosier manufacturers. I stand with Hoosier families in opposing this $93 trillion deal. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, will the senator from Indiana yield for a question?
I will.
Senator, do you believe that climate change is real? Will you stand also with the scientific community, which believes unanimously or almost completely unanimously that climate change is real and that human activity causes it?
So that's an easy one, I think, my good colleague. I have publicly said for a long period of time, you can check my record, that I believe the climate is changing. I believe that all flora, fauna, and human beings have some impact on that. I also believe fervently that we can protect our environment without wrecking our economy. And we can do that through energy efficiency initiatives, investment in energy R&D, carbon capture and sequestration, and adoption of free market principles. I read a very impactful book in response to my good colleague there early on in my adulthood. It was called, and I would commend it to him, Ecocide in the USSR. ECOCIDE, Ecocide in the USSR, explaining how centrally planned economies and fatal conceit-like efforts to engineer a better environment centrally, to plan an economy centrally, end up decimating our natural environment. And that continues to have an impact on how I look at these issues. And perhaps we'll find an opportunity to work together, though, and find some common ground. It won't be on the Green New Deal, though. I yield back.
Doesn't the senator believe, if I may ask one more follow-up?
Mr. President from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come down to the floor to join my colleagues in expressing concerns over maybe well-intended but poorly constructed policy in the Green New Deal. But I want to start, first I want to start by saying I have no intention of yielding until the end of my remarks. But the one question that I would have for people across the aisle, do you actually support the Green New Deal? Do you support it in the form that it's been proposed? I can't imagine that you do, because you understand the math, you understand the challenges, you understand the reality that $65,000 a year is the median household income in North Carolina. So what we're talking about, the cost of this bill over 10 years is roughly what the average North Carolinian family makes. We know that's not sustainable. We know it's not sustainable to have our electric bills increase by $3,800 a year. We know it's not sustainable to go beyond just the energy components of the Green New Deal to other aspects of the Green New Deal. It just don't make sense. So $93 trillion is something I can't get my head wrapped around. I know that's the number that we're talking about. But I think we can get to the household impact and recognize it's not sustainable, right? So why are we having this discussion?
Would the senator yield on that $93
$1
trillion bogus number made up by the Koch brothers?
Mr. President, I ask regular order.
Senator will be in order.
Regular order.
That is a completely
Senator from North
regular order.
That is a made-up number by the Koch brothers.
Senator from Massachusetts will
That's
suspend.
brought to the floor
The
by
senator
the
from
Koch
Massachusetts will suspend.
Mr. President,
The Senate is out of order. The senator from North Carolina has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
He can yield for a question or decline.
Mr. President,
And he has made it very clear he will not yield until he's finished.
And I will state for any other members who come in, I have no intention of yielding. And in my time, the 4 years that I've been here, it's never occurred to me to actually interrupt the way that we've interrupted here. But maybe that actually gets to the point. This bill as proposed doesn't work. Now, I want to go back and tell you, as a member of the North Carolina House, when I was in the minority as a Republican, I supported the renewable portfolio standard. I went to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and said, what you're proposing is not sustainable. Let's work together and do something different. And we did. That gave rise to almost 13% of all the energy generated in North Carolina today being generated from renewable sources. It gave rise to a sustainable electric bill that's one of the most competitive in the country. So what's happened with the new Green Deal is that the people at the extreme are preventing those of us who actually want to make progress from having a reasonable discussion. Instead, we're shouting over each other. I don't care if it's 93 trillion, 43 trillion, or 10 trillion. It's unsustainable. We could sit here and question the sources, but at the end of the day, we all know that this was theater. This was something that people wanted to pitch. They wanted to win an election, but it was a dishonest promise that could never be fulfilled. If you take a look at the other provisions of this bill, guaranteed jobs, I mean, it's reading like some sort of a socialist manifesto. And as somebody who grew up in a trailer park, who didn't get a degree until I was 36 years old, I want an America that gives me an opportunity, not an America that tells me what my job is and how much money I'm going to make. So we've got to have a realistic discussion about the new Green Deal. We are pushing people into corners and not having a good discussion about things that we should be making progress on. And by the way, just out of levity, we've even had some people go so far as to say maybe we should reduce the number of cows on the planet since they create methane gas. I'm not going to get into the gross reasons why. So maybe the chicken caucus is in favor of getting rid of cows or eating more cows. But why don't we just lower the temperature? Recognize we have a proposal here that doesn't work. Recognize that it was generally motivated by politics. And when you take such an extreme stand, you should expect the other side to come to the floor, just as we're doing today, and make it real. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, had a lot of discussion about the energy parts of the Green New Deal, but it goes in lots of other areas. There are many frequently asked questions. I'd just say on the energy costs, which President Obama's energy advisor says you couldn't reach the goal. The one thing we need to remember on the energy cost is that families pay those utility bills. We just avoided a clean power regulation that in my state would have doubled the utility bill in 10 or 12 years. And during the 3 years or so we were debating that, because of court cases that kept saying, no, there's not really the authority to do this. I kept reminding the people I work for, next time you write your utility bill, just write it out of your check one more time. Because if this goes into effect within a decade, that's what you'll be doing. And see what happens when you write that bill out of your check one more time and what happens. Some of the questions on this have been about other things as well. The fact that we love a challenge, this Green New Deal creates that, talks about Medicare for all, talks about, at least in the talking points, job guarantees for all, a vacation in every job guaranteed by the government. I think even maybe a vacation in the government program if you choose not to work. There are lots of things here for people to be concerned about. There are estimates of cost, but even, Mr. President, if they were 3 times the cost, it would be pretty extraordinary. In fact, $36 trillion would rebuild the entire interstate highway system every year for 100 years. When you're talking about $93 trillion, $80 trillion is the entire gross domestic product of the world. These are big numbers. It is a big bill. Surprisingly, a dozen senators are supporting this bill. They have co-sponsored the bill. Whether it's the guaranteed jobs number or the universal health care number or the all renewable electric grid system number or the guaranteed green housing number that individuals would have to comply with, this is an amazing step in a different direction. It's one the country clearly will not take. It's one that I believe even the sponsors have some concerns about. And we'll have a chance to vote on it here in the next few days or weeks, and we'll see what the American people have to say about it. I yield the time.
President? Mr. President?
Senator from Rhode Island.
I understand that the majority has the floor, and so I will be very brief. I have enormous regard for Senator Blunt and for those who have spoken already. I just want to say that for the people who say we want to have a discussion about this issue, we are so eager to have a discussion about this issue. It has been, I come here every week hoping to have a discussion about this issue, and I would love to have a discussion about this issue. I'd love to have hearings in the Environment and Public Works Committee about a climate bill. And I would love to have people working together to solve this problem. And I will say that Senator Schatz and I have a piece of climate legislation that is not this one, but it does have the support of 7 Republican former chairs of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, 6 current and former Republican congressmen, 4 former Republican EPA ministers, 3 former Treasury or State, Secretaries of Treasury or State, 2 former Republican chairs of the Federal Reserve, and 1 former Republican CBO director. A Republican congressman referred to that bill as not just an olive branch reaching out to Republicans, but an olive limb reaching out to Republicans. So I hope that what can emerge from this is a real conversation about real bills, and in the context of that, we would be very interested to know what the Republican proposal is to deal with climate change. And with that, I turn back the floor and I thank the presiding officer, and I appreciate the courtesy of my distinguished colleagues.
Mr. President.
Senator from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to thank my colleague from Iowa for organizing the discussion on the Green New Deal resolution. The public doesn't really pay a whole lot of attention to non-binding resolutions here in Congress, but that's not the case with this one. The sponsors of the new Green Deal in the House and the Senate certainly deserve recognition for the profile they've managed to create so quickly. But of course, that's a double-edged sword, because now people are beginning to pay attention to what's actually in the Green New Deal. Leader McConnell has proposed bringing the resolution to the floor, which has created, in my view, sort of a baffling response. The plan's sponsors are claiming that a vote is, quote, cynical, meant to, quote, disrupt their, quote, movement. Mr. President, you and I both know that every member of this body would clamor to have their bills brought up for floor consideration. But you know what? Most of us here live in the land of realistic and practical solutions. The Green New Deal is very vague. It does include enough detail to know that it proposes radical solutions that, in my view, are neither practical nor realistic. It's a wish list dressed up as environmental policy. Now, we knew it was going to be expensive. We knew the goal was to eliminate coal and gas industries, along with a lot of other good-paying jobs that are supported in energy states like mine. And this isn't the first salvo on the war on coal, for sure. We knew all the economic harm that would be proposing, but this is a massive shift, a shift to the left that goes far beyond anything the Democrats have proposed before. This plan doesn't stop at eliminating the use of coal and natural gas for electricity. The plan also ends nuclear electricity and severely curtails the commercial air industry. The environmental and energy components of this proposal are estimated to cost to $8.3 to $12.3 trillion over the next decade, which averages out to about $52,000 to $71,000 for every American household. And we'll be left with possibly an energy grid that lacks affordability and reliability to make the American manufacturers competitive around the globe and meet the basic needs of our families. Right now, coal, natural gas, and nuclear energy account for 83% of all the electricity produced in the United States. It's neither practical nor realistic to believe that we could phase all of that out, capacity out, without some catastrophic consequences. But unbelievably, this is just one piece of the Green New Deal. The sticker shock combines with tens of trillions of dollars to fund guaranteed jobs for people unwilling to work, eliminate private health care for 170 Americans in favor of a government-run system, replace or retrofit all housing stock for environmental compliance and guaranteeing it to every American, and putting food on everyone's table. Altogether, possibly $93 trillion over a 10-year period of time. Well, we could liquidate all the wealth in the entire country and maybe just cover that tab, but we wouldn't have anything left. The Green New Deal sponsors claim the government will be making investments. They claim that the returns will pay for everything and make a profit for the people. Realistic? Practical? I think not. And if it fails, then what do we do? Some say the Green New Deal, even if it's a disaster of a policy that would destroy our economy, at least the Congress is finally talking about climate change. And this is what we've heard my colleague, we serve on the EPW committee together, which is a huge disservice, I think, to us, because we've been working in a bipartisan fashion to deliver real solutions since before anyone had ever heard of the Green New Deal. In the EPW committee, senators from coal states, such as Senator Barrasso, who's here from Wyoming, and Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island, and Senator Carper and myself, we've been working for market-driven solutions to the challenge of atmospheric CO2. Members of both parties have worked and will continue to work on these important policies to meaningfully address carbon challenges while also protecting and creating jobs. We do not need a $93 trillion turn that fundamentally alters the foundations of our country. We're capable of making investments in technology and infrastructure to address our nation's challenges in a common sense and bipartisan way. But the Green New Deal is not practical, it is not realistic, and it's a bit scary that so many Democrats are embracing it. The American people deserve to know where each of us stands on this policy. That's why we're going to have a vote. I'm glad that we'll have the opportunity to take a vote on this resolution in the coming months, and I hope that all of my colleagues will join me in opposing this utterly unfathomable and unworkable resolution. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
So I had prepared remarks to address what many of my colleagues have just covered, and that would be the preposterous proposal of the Green New Deal. I want to take a little different angle. I think there is a point. So often, those of us on the conservative side of the ledger, I think, get overwhelmed by the conversation being dominated by the other side. And it's a fertile ground to want to try to use a better environment to parlay that in an incremental way into more government. I think what we've got here is just like addressing health care costs. We had Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which turned out to be the Unaffordable Care Act. But there were issues that were valid. In my own company years ago, I was worried about it. Drafted a plan that was proactive, addressed high health care costs, made the pledge you should never go broke because you get sick or have a bad accident, crafted a plan through the real world that cut costs, and my employees have not paid a premium increase in 9 years. I want to take the Green New Deal. I'm a conservationist. I'm a member of the Nature Conservancy as a business and an individual. We cannot let the other side co-opt the issue, preempt it, because they think the argument is on their side. I'm not going to belabor the point that I think it's preposterous. I want to make the point that if you think any of that can be done, whether it's 50 trillion, 93 trillion, keep in mind, we're running nearly $1 trillion deficits. We're $22 trillion in debt. Does that sound like anything that the federal government could actually solve in a sustainable way when we're in a pickle like we're currently in? Until we change the dynamic here and get individuals that I think know how to do things where it works in states like Indiana, in many states, maybe let states have a bigger hand in the equation where their budgets are balanced, where they have cash balances, where it's not a false hope. Let's look at the particulars of what the Green New Deal is supposed to do in addition to cleaning up our environment, which we've made great strides with. It's being spun as an economic argument.
It's the exact opposite of that. I want to challenge folks on our side of the ledger, from the practical side, to where we generally lose out on the general argument, and incrementally things change against us over time. We just had legislation pass in 2017. I want to tell this little story, what we did in our own special way. I'm going to challenge enterprisers. I'm going to challenge businesses across the country to think about this as a way to avoid that. 2017, we had, in my opinion, for enterprisers, small businesses, farmers, I've been involved in both, the biggest opportunity that's come along in years. We are keeping more of our own resources, not sending it here to a broken institution that's given us all these deficits and debt. But we got to do something with it. Back in January of 2018, my son, who is one of my 3 kids now in my business, said, "Dad, let's take tax reform. Let's share the benefits with employees." Great idea. I didn't think it would have a bigger political meaning until he said, "Hey, let's put it in the company memo that it's due to tax reform." We've taken, in my mind, the biggest thing, whether you'd want to return the dividends into the environment, into higher wages, into whatever you want to do, and we've had less than a year to run with it. All I know is that many companies in Indiana, ours, we lowered health care costs. I'd flattened them for 9 years. We raised 401k benefits. We started quarterly bonuses instead of just annual ones. And we're doing what I think this country needs to do: quit looking to the federal government to solve all of our problems, even when they've got an argument like we need to further improve our environment. We need to avoid possibly a catastrophe down the road where we do stick our head in the sand. But don't look to this institution to do it, because I don't think you can credibly say that you can do anything in the context of the product that's been delivered over the last decade or two. States, individuals, businesses, organizations, but especially businesses, because we've reaped the benefits, in my opinion, of the biggest legislation that's occurred in decades. Put our money where our mouth is, where my company's is. Invest in your employees. Change a system from the bottom up, not from the top down.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, first I want to thank my colleagues for coming down here and having this important discussion. And I want to thank my Democratic colleagues, who I have a lot of respect for being here and having this debate. I'm sure it's not going to be the first time that we're going to be doing this on the Green New Deal or other elements of proposals coming from the House or in the Senate. You know, this is a big issue, what's happening in the House, what's going to happen over here with some of our colleagues. You know, I think in many ways it's an issue that focuses on the future, where the country's going. As the Majority Leader recently said in an interview, I can pretty safely say that this is the first time in my political career that the essence of America is being debated. Socialism, democratic capitalism, okay, let's have that debate. We're having that debate. What is the essence of America, Mr. President? Well, I believe it's freedom and liberty, and that's what we're founded on, and that's what I think proposals like the Green New Deal would undermine. To be clear, you know, some people are joking about it, about banning hamburgers or airplanes or returning to the horse and buggy, but I actually think there's many people who are looking at this very seriously, and so we should. And some of these kind of ideas can be funny until they're not funny. So what we're trying to do here is talk about this proposal in a serious manner. And in my state, the great state of Alaska, in a deadly serious manner. There's so much that's in this idea, the Green New Deal, a government takeover of health care, free housing, free food. The list goes on and on. The costs have been pointed out are very high. But today, Mr. President, what I want to do is talk about one aspect that would be particularly detrimental to my state and many, many other states. My colleague from West Virginia, North Dakota, they're here on the floor. And that's this proposal to ban hydrocarbons produced in America within a decade. Okay, this is not a joke. There are many members in this body, somewhere on the floor right now, in the House, who think this is a serious proposal and would like to do it. So I want to talk about that. Now, Mr. President, I want to stipulate, I'm certainly somebody who's in favor of all of the above energy. The fact that America is now producing more oil, more gas, more renewables than any other country in the world is good for all of us, Democrat, Republican. And, you know, my colleague from Rhode Island is here. He and I have worked on a whole host of issues together involving oceans. I think that technological advances with regard to gas, hundreds of years of supplies of gas, natural gas, with technology, with renewables, provides huge opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to work together on to bring down greenhouse gas emissions. Enormous. We're just scratching the surface. I look forward to working with him and the senator from Massachusetts on these kind of ideas, because I think they're exciting, and I think when you're burning natural gas at very, very high temperatures, you almost have very little greenhouse gas emissions. Combine that with technology, renewables, we have hundreds of years of these supplies. It's a great opportunity, exciting, and I want to work with them. But let me get back to the proposal in the Green New Deal on natural resources. In my opinion, we do not spend enough time on this floor talking about the positive societal benefits of natural resource development in America. Oil, gas, renewables, fisheries. So these industries don't just fuel our power generation and transportation and electricity for our homes. These industries literally lift people out of poverty. They lengthen life expectancy. They literally save lives. Mr. President, there is a strong correlation between poverty and lack of economic opportunity and the health of our citizens. I'm going to show a few charts here. This correlation in particular is strong in my state, particularly with our Alaska Native population. In 1954, the Interior Department, with the help of the University of Pittsburgh, conducted a study of the health of Alaska Natives. Here's the quote. 1954, the indigenous peoples of Native Alaska are the victims of sickness, crippling conditions, and premature death to a degree exceeded in very few parts of the world. Some of the poorest people on the planet were my constituents in Alaska, in America. In 1954, more than 10 years later, in 1969, just 50 years ago, the situation was still dire. Here's what Emil Nadi, the president of the Alaska Federation of Natives, told Congress 50 years ago in 1969. The Native people in rural Alaska live in the most miserable homes in the United States. The life expectancy of the average Native Alaskan is 34 years old, compared to 69 years old for the rest of the country. So what happened after that, Mr. President? Well, we had a big change. We're not there yet, but a big change, and I want to explain it. This was a chart studied in the Journal of Internal Medicine just last year, a study that was published in 2018 about the life expectancies of Americans. And where you see blue and purple is where Americans' life expectancy increased the most. The most. Well, the state with the greatest change in the entire country was my state. That's a pretty important statistic, by the way, life expectancy. Doesn't get more important than that. Okay? Are you living longer? Look what happened in Alaska. The North Slope of Alaska, the Aleutian Island chain, Southeast, all experienced huge increases in life expectancy. Life expectancy from these very low levels, some of the lowest in the world. Mr. President, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Here's why it happened. On the North Slope of Alaska, this Congress passed the Trans-Alaska Pipeline Act to develop Prudhoe Bay, to develop oil and gas, some of the biggest fields in the world. We also had a large, very large zinc mine at the same time that came onto production. We also had, because of this body's Magnuson-Stevens Act, a huge increase in our fisheries. Bottom line, natural resource development happened in Alaska, in America, and people's lives increased. People's lives increased. That is a remarkable thing, and we don't talk about it enough. The average life expectancy increase in Alaska was almost between 8 and 13 years. That is a measure of success, and it became because we were developing our resources, oil and gas. That's why I am taking this Green New Deal literally deadly seriously, because what we've done in our state and in our country by producing resources is we've created the ability for people to actually live longer. And I challenge my colleagues to come up with a better statistic, a more important statistic than that. Mr. President, I'm going to end with a quote from a gentleman who came down here and testified in front of the Senate, Matthew Rexford, a proud Alaska Native leader from Kaktovik, Alaska, which is in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And he came down here to testify that Congress should give his small community the opportunity to develop the resources near his village. And we did that in 2017 after a 40-year debate. He spoke firsthand about his knowledge about what resource development did for America, for Alaska, and for his community. Quote, "The oil and gas industry supports our communities by providing jobs, business opportunities, infrastructure investment. It has built our schools, hospitals. It has moved our people from third world living conditions to what we expect in America. We refuse to go backward in time." That's what he said, Mr. President. I believe the Green New Deal, certainly its ban on hydrocarbon productions, would take us back in time. For the sake of Matthew and all the Alaskans who have done so well by responsibly developing our resources, we're not going to allow that to happen. I yield the floor to my colleague from North Dakota.
The gentleman yield, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would ask through you that the gentleman from Alaska yield.
Mr. President, Senate will be in order.
Through you, Mr. President, I would ask.
Senate will be in order. Does the senator from Alaska yield for a question?
I believe he yielded the floor.
I'm yielding my time to the senator from North Dakota.
No, that's not possible. Sorry.
Mr. President.
Would the gentleman from Alaska yield for a question?
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I believe I still have the floor.
No, you yielded the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts is recognized.
I thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I would pose a question to the senator from Alaska.
The senator from Massachusetts cannot pose a question. He has the floor.
Through the chair, I would pose a question to the senator from Alaska about whether or not he believes that human activity is largely
responsible. The senator from Alaska does not have the floor. He cannot respond.
For the warming of this planet.
Senator from Alaska does not have the floor, therefore he cannot respond.
Well,
the senator from Massachusetts has the floor.
I thank you, Mr. President. I will just make this point, through you, Mr. President, which is that there is nothing in the resolution. The words fossil fuels are not in the resolution. Number two, airplanes are not planned in the resolution. Number three, there's no guarantee of health care for anyone everyone in America in the resolution. Number four, there is nothing that provides for those unwilling to work in the resolution. None of this is true, and we know that the Koch brothers paid for this $93 trillion study, and that's all we're hearing from the Republican side is a Koch brother-produced document, which is absolutely inaccurate. There's no banning of airplanes. There's no guarantee of Medicare for all. None of that is in the resolution. This entire discussion is based upon a completely fraudulent, bogus report that the Koch brothers produced. What we're trying to say to the other side is we should have a debate about the science. We should have a debate about the human activity. We should have a debate about what the solutions are, and we should bring it out here as a great deliberative body. But right now, we're debating the Green New Deal, and the Republicans haven't given us any hearings, no scientists, no witnesses, no debate. They're just doing this as the Koch brothers have produced a report of $93 trillion worth of cost, which is completely and totally inaccurate. In fact, with regard to the accusation of the banning of airplanes, PolitiFact has looked at it, examined it, and said it is completely and totally inaccurate. So I think it's difficult to have a debate when the facts here are those which we cannot submit to committees, witnesses, debate, and instead all we're subject to is a representation of the Green New Deal, which is completely inaccurate. The words fossil fuels don't even appear in the Green New Deal, for that matter. And so this is not right. If the Republicans want to, they should set up a debate, and we can have it out here on whether or not the planet is dangerously warming, whether or not human activity is principally responsible, and whether or not this body should take action in order to deal with that problem, and whether or not economically we can unleash a technological revolution to solve the problem. That is what we should be debating out here this afternoon, not a whole group of bogus facts produced by the Koch brothers, paid for by the Koch brothers, that are being repeated over and over again on the other side without any Republicans saying that they actually believe that the planet is dangerously warming. They actually agree with the UN scientists who say it's an existential threat to us, that they actually agree that it's largely caused by human activity, and that we, the greatest deliberative body in the world, should have a robust debate, and that the Republicans, if they believe it's serious, should present their own plan for debate out here on the Senate floor.
Would my colleague yield?
I'd be glad to yield.
You know, we thank our friends from the other side of the aisle for helping make our case. We have been saying for several weeks that we...
Senator, asking a question?
Yes, I'm asking a question. Does the senator from Massachusetts have the floor? I ask a question of the senator of Massachusetts.
I yield.
No.
Yeah, I ask unanimous
consent. Does the senator from Massachusetts yield for a question?
Yeah, I yield to the leader.
I ask unanimous consent. I'd be allowed to engage in the colloquy.
The leader cannot ask consent. He does not have.
Okay, I will ask a question. It's a question from the senator. We've been making the case for the last several weeks that our Republican colleagues, they love to get up and rant about what they're against, even though they exaggerate, they tell mistruths about the bill that you have sponsored. But we've been asking repeatedly, haven't we? 3 questions. Do you believe climate change is real? 2, do you believe it's caused by human activity? And 3, most importantly, what would you do about it? Here we've had an hour of debate, haven't we? From our Republican colleagues. A lot of mistruths, a lot of here's what we're against. Not one single thing that they are for. So isn't it true, my friend from Massachusetts, that they've helped make our case? We're glad they're talking about climate change, finally. But we have to do something about it, and isn't it true we haven't heard a single positive response about what they would do?
The leader has put his finger right on it. We want a debate. We want to see their plan. We want to know if they agree with the science of the entire United Nations and 13 of our own federal agencies who produced an identical report in the end of 2018. It's dangerous. It's a great threat to our country. We have to do something about it. So where is the Republican plan? What is their answer? Of course, they don't have one. They want to bring out the Green New Deal with no hearings, no witnesses, no science, when they should be bringing out their own plan. And you are right, Mr. Leader. It is just basically a condition that they have, and the number that they're using, the $93 trillion, in terms of the cost of the Green New Deal, is a Koch brother-produced number. It's their group that put it together. So how could we possibly be having a serious debate about something that the Koch brothers have produced in terms of dealing with global warming, since they are central players in this dangerous warming of our planet? I'd be glad to yield back to the
Yield
leader.
for a second question.
Be glad to yield back.
Now, isn't it true that our Republican colleagues have been in the majority for 5 years? That during that time, more and more Americans believe that global warming is a serious problem. I think it's above 2/3, it's at 70%, a significant percentage of Republicans and a majority of Democrats and independents. And isn't it true that in those 5 years, we haven't heard a single positive that the leader, the Republican leader, our friend, hasn't brought a single piece of legislation to the floor that would deal with climate change in any way? Isn't that correct?
The leader is correct. No solutions, 5 years, and it's only more dangerously warmed on the planet. $400 billion worth of damage was done to our country in the last 2 years. We have fires out in the West, flooding, $400 billion worth of damage, and the consensus among scientists is that it's only going to grow worse as each year goes by, and still no answers. Nothing on the floor from the Republicans, nothing that would deal with the problem, and no admission that it's caused by human beings and we can do something about it. Be glad to yield back.
We have not heard a single answer from any of the senators on the floor or any who spoke about what their plan is. So I would ask you to repeat and ask them 3 questions that they still haven't answered. A, simple questions with no predisposed answers. A, do any of our Republican colleagues, this is a question, believe that climate change is real?
We don't know the answer.
Second, do any of our Republican colleagues over there believe that it's caused by human activity?
We don't know the answer.
And C, do they have any plan, proposal, suggestion as to how we deal with the issue?
We don't know the answer.
And I would ask my colleague to ask our Republican friends, if they have an answer to any of those questions, to yield the floor to them.
And I would be glad to yield the floor to any of them that would be willing to be recognized. But the problem is, through the leader, that they keep talking about a $93 trillion cost, which is a report from the American Action Forum, a partisan right-wing group funded by the Koch brothers and Karl Rove as a sister group to his Crossroads USA 501c3. That's what we're now debating out here on the floor, and not the science.
Because we ask them to not repeat the same talking points about what they're against and finally say something about what they're for.
So I would yield to any of my friends on the other side of the aisle who have concrete, positive proposals for dealing with the crisis of climate change in our country and on the planet.
Mr. President?
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to come to the floor to answer the specific question. And I would point to an op-ed that I wrote for the New York Times last year. Perhaps the senator from New York doesn't read his hometown newspaper, but there's an editorial, New York Times, December 18th, cut carbon through innovation, not regulation. It's a plan. Cut carbon through innovation, not regulation. The question is, do we believe that the climate is changing? Do humans have an impact? The answer is yes to both. As a matter of fact, I wrote it, climate is changing. And we collectively have a responsibility to do something about it. Right here, New York Times, December 18th. Second, the United States and the world will continue to rely on affordable and abundant fossil fuels, including coal, to power our economies for decades to come. And we need to also rely on innovation, not new taxes, not punishing global agreements. That's the ultimate solution. And I will point out, Mr. President, that this is something that I had written and submitted and published long before the so-called Green New Deal was ever introduced into Congress, either in the House or into the Senate. I go on to say people across the world are rejecting the idea that carbon taxes and raising the cost of energy is the answer to lowering emissions. Because we know, Mr. President, as I go on in France, the government had just suspended a planned fuel tax increase after some of its citizens took to the streets in protest. It was every story on the news. And in the United States, the results of the November election showed that these plans and other government interventions are just as unpopular. Voters in Washington state rejected the creation of an expensive tax on carbon emissions. In Colorado, a ballot measure to severely restrict drilling was defeated. And in Arizona, voters rejected a mandate to make the state's utilities much more dependent on renewable energy by 2030. They rejected it, regardless of the cost to consumers. So, Mr. President, I would point out that all three of those states elected liberal Democrats to Congress on election night. And, Mr. President, in further answer to that question, I would point to USA Today, March 4th, 2019. Now, today is the 6th, so we're talking Monday. Today is Wednesday. This is this week's paper. Front page, to a warming planet's rescue, to the rescue of a warming planet, carbon capture. In the race against climate change, scientists are looking for ways to pull CO2 out of the Earth's atmosphere and store it away. And what they point to, Mr. President, is bipartisan legislation passed by this body, passed by the House, signed into law by President Trump, focusing on carbon capture, sequestration, talks about a program called 45Q that is the Future Act. One of the co-sponsors from the other side of the aisle is on the floor right now. His name is mentioned, my name is mentioned, in finding the solution. So there are Republican solutions and ideas that are focused on innovation, not regulation, not taxation, focused on freedom and the innovation that we've had. So I just come to tell you, Mr. President, that there are solutions. The Republicans will continue to offer them. We had a hearing most recently, just last week, on something called the Use It Act, again, to capture carbon and to sequester. We've been working on new age nuclear power, working with leaders around the world. We have passed that, and it was signed into law. An innovation bill for nuclear power, new age nuclear power, that will be smaller reactors, safer reactors, cheaper to use. No carbon whatsoever, Mr. President. So there are absolute solutions, and Republicans are going to continue to come to the floor, but we're not going to support something that would bankrupt the country, something that would raise the cost of energy for families, something that would drive people to the point of having to spend money they don't have, having our country borrow money that we don't have, all at a time. When you say, what is the cost? There are suggestions and the numbers that have been raised. I haven't heard any numbers from the other side of the aisle. So, Mr. President, I come to the floor to tell you Republicans have continued to offer solutions, and some of these solutions I've been offering for 10 years. It took us a while to get these into law, but they are working. They're working, and it has been identified as working. Even President Obama's former president's Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz, who came and testified in the Energy Committee, said there are two things that will make a big difference. One is the new age nuclear work that we're doing, and the other is carbon capture and sequestration. Those are large-scale products that work. So, Mr. President, I see other colleagues on the floor, and do I have the floor right now, or am I in response to a question?
The senator from Wyoming has the floor.
Well, as I then continue to have the floor, I would like to point out that look, we have a booming economy in this country, Mr. President. In just over a year, with tax relief, helped create 3 million new jobs, manufacturing jobs, 10 straight months, increased fact that we have more jobs available than there are people looking for those jobs. We have a booming economy. I want to do nothing that's going to harm these people all across the country that are working, that have an opportunity. Such a strong, healthy, growing economy. But this Green New Deal, this big government takeover of the economy, it's masked as an environmental proposal. To me, it's radical. The president of the Laborers International Union of North America calls it a bad deal. You take a look at America, we're leading the world in reducing carbon dioxide because of the technological and innovative techniques that we have had. And we know that what we hear about the Green New Deal, it's prohibitively expensive. Predictions up to $93 trillion. The entire net worth of the United States, of all the homes and all the families and everything, is only a little, 112 trillion, and this alone would cost 93 trillion. You can go by all of how much it's going to cost every individual family. It's completely unaffordable. It's not something that is workable, but it is so far outside the American mainstream, even if it were affordable. So what we have seen here is the Democrats take another hard left turn. In just 10 years, the nation's energy system under this Green New Deal would undergo a Washington makeover. The Green New Deal would end the use of energy resources that currently provide power for 3 out of 5 homes in the United States and businesses in the United States. So think about the harm that would cause the economy. This Green New Deal mandates the use of expensive power sources that can't keep the lights on. Look, wind and solar are important. We need more renewable energy in this country. But right now, wind and solar provide less than 8% of our electricity. So should we increase the use of renewables? Absolutely. But eliminating affordable coal and natural gas would be a costly mistake. And not only that, it's impossible to do. The electric grid can't handle it. Last month, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed entitled, "The Green New Deal's Impossible Electric Grid." Impossible electric grid. Written by Robert Bloom of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. He writes that if the electric grid relies solely on renewable energy sources, the grid itself may collapse. And that's not all we lose if the grid collapses. Our transportation system is in the crosshairs. The Green New Deal seeks to transform how Americans travel. It calls for an extensive and expensive national high-speed rail system to replace air travel. The state of California attempted to build a high-speed rail line between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Turns out the price was too high, Mr. President, even for California. The governor, Gavin Newsom, canceled the line just recently between San Francisco and Los Angeles. Why? Said because of the massive cost. But it's all part of the Green New Deal. Question is, if California can't afford to build high-speed rail between 2 major cities, how can we afford to build a system that crisscrosses the country? We can't. The Green New Deal doesn't stop at energy and travel. It extends to every building in the country. Homeowners are going to be forced to retrofit their houses. Businesses would have to do the same. This is what massive government overreach looks like. The rest of the world, Mr. President, is going to continue to pollute, even if the country were to adopt something as extreme as the Green New Deal. It would cancel all of the gains that we made in the United States by the fact that our emissions continue to go down. 2017, we produced just 13% of global emissions here in the United States. Just 13%. China and India together, 33%, and they're rising over there. Without dramatic changes from India and China, global emissions are going to continue to climb. So even if all the Green New Deal's costly mandates went into effect and the punishment it would do to our country and our economy, still be no real effect on Earth's temperature. So look, it's no surprise that the Democrats are trying to duck this big green bomb. Senate Democrats may even decide to vote present to avoid voting for their own extreme proposal that a dozen of them have either signed on to or co-sponsored, including just about every Democrat senator who's running for president. They've all signed on. They're all co-sponsoring it. This green dream is unreachable, but there's a proven way to reduce our emissions, which is why I talk about what we're wanting to do in a positive way with nuclear energy, with carbon capture, things that have gathered the attention of the New York Times and of the front page of USA Today on Monday. So we're going to continue to work with the Future Act, with the Use It Act. The committee is going to continue to work in a bipartisan way because Republicans are committed to find solutions through innovation, not taxation, not regulation, solutions that do not hurt our strong and healthy growing economy. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
From North Dakota.
President, I rise to join my colleagues, first of all, in, yes, opposing this Green New Deal, this joint resolution that is full of so many dangerous policies and positions. But before I get into my reasons for that, let me also join my colleague from Wyoming in saying I'm for the things he's for, and even more. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage, refined coal, all kinds of ways that we can accomplish the same goals together with realistic proposals, not fantasies. But let me also say something that should warm the heart of our colleague from Massachusetts. The Koch brothers strongly opposed my candidacy and my election to the United States Senate. I owe them nothing, and I'm grateful. You know, I wasn't always this pessimistic about the possibilities in this chamber. I believe, in fact, that divided government presents an opportunity for the parties to come together, to find common ground, to have legislative victories based on shared goals and shared values. I hope we can get back to that. And I'd hoped, even in controversial things like immigration and health care, and I'd certainly hoped for it for energy policy. But when I heard the Democrats were proposing this Green New Deal, I didn't view it as an opportunity for political gamesmanship. I viewed it as an opportunity to find common ground, to compromise, to find balance, to negotiate the way that I believe our founders intended it. But I don't think killing innovators with something like a Green New Deal is how we accomplish the goals that they say they're for in their Green New Deal. You can imagine my disappointment when I read the contents of this joint resolution. The Green New Deal is not serious policy. It's a fantasy. And I'm personally disappointed to see so many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle co-sponsor this, especially those that are seeking higher office, and ignore the realities. Well, you know, someone earlier mentioned that the Green New Deal never talks about airplanes. No, but it does say that we want to transition to a 100% renewable energy by 2030. Well, I don't know how you fly airplanes without having fossil fuels. Mr. President, as you may have seen, in my state of North Dakota, we're having a really, really cold winter. In fact, most of the upper Midwest is. We are having, you know, the National Weather Service referred to a stretch of this really cold weather earlier this winter as a polar vortex. We call it winter, polar vortex, whatever you want to call it. It's been a rough winter. Rough winters aren't rare or new to us, but this one's been particularly cold. Several days in a row, well below zero. In fact, one day, the wind chill during the polar vortex was well below 50 below. When I say, by the way, just for those of you from the South, 50 below is below zero. It's a really low number. But I believe that there are some facts that have been left out related to how this will affect human health. On January 1st, in North Dakota and Hettinger, it reached 42 below zero without wind chill. That's real temperature. And that's, again, happened in many communities throughout the state. And during these temperatures, guess what doesn't happen? The wind doesn't blow. And when the wind doesn't blow, windmills stop providing energy, and they actually start consuming it. When I was a regulator, I cited a couple thousand megawatts of wind turbines in North Dakota. But when the energy can't be produced by wind turbines, it turns to gas. And then guess what happens? Natural gas providers have to ask their customers to curtail their gas consumption because they need the gas for a more firm supply of electricity that backs up the wind turbines. Now, I was a utility regulator. I saw this happen a lot, and it happened just a couple of weeks ago in the Midwest. Can you imagine? When temperatures drop below a minus 22, wind turbines stop working. And that means that many North Dakotans, like my mom, like my grandchildren, have to rely on intermittent electricity to fill the gap caused by the cutbacks in gas. Do you see the cycle of this? It's a circle. One bad thing leads to another bad thing. In this situation, it's when, not if, but when an electric outage occurs during a polar vortex, it would be disastrous for the people of my state and many others. This is a serious health risk, and I do not want my friends and family to ever wonder if they'll be able to warm their home when they need it the most. But even if the Green Deal were to pass, we could never afford it. You've heard lots of testimony today from members about the expected cost of up to $93 trillion. And you can argue it's not 93, it's only 90, or it's only 80, or it's only 50. It's too much. It's unaffordable. It's more, 93 trillion is more than 90% of the combined wealth of all, I said all American households in this country. It would cost every American family as much as $65,000 per year, which is, as you know, more than the average yearly household income. A tax and spend agenda to pay for an energy plan that wouldn't even work flies in the face of one of our nation's greatest success stories, our domestic energy production. Mr. President, the U.S. rocket ship economy is being driven to a large degree by the energy renaissance happening all across our country in states like mine of North Dakota. Our strategy of energy dominance encompasses an all-of-the-above approach, harnessing wind and oil and natural gas and solar and nuclear and, yes, and coal potential. Millions of Americans are employed by energy development, and that number is only expected to grow. In 2020, the United States, in fact, will become a net energy exporter for the first time. At the same time, emissions have steadily decreased over the years, and it serves as a very important national security hedge. Mr. President, why would we halt this positive momentum and stymie promising solutions? The key to a better energy future is not taxation and regulation, but innovation and empowerment, as so beautifully articulated by my friend from Wyoming. If these recent polar vortexes and cold winters taught us anything, it's that we have a well-rounded energy policy that encourages the best ideas. We need to be pragmatic and collaborative to find solutions. That's not what defines this Green New Deal. It's unrealistic, unworkable, and unaffordable. And I hope we never become so lopsided that my friends, neighbors, and family back home are unable to turn the heat on when they need it the most.
Would my friend from North Dakota be willing to yield for a question? My friend from North Dakota be willing to yield for a question?
Senator from Arkansas.
Mr. President, I'm grateful for the opportunity to echo my colleagues' concerns about the Green New Deal. We are here because the Majority Leader has indicated the Senate will be considering this misguided proposal in the coming weeks. You would think our colleagues on the other side of the aisle would be ecstatic about the idea of a Senate vote on a resolution that essentially encompasses their party's entire platform. Instead, the Minority Leader is scrambling to conceive ideas that will give his caucus members cover instead of embracing the plan. I can see why. The Green New Deal didn't quite receive the celebration that Democrats were expecting when it was announced. Its release was greeted with a combination of bewilderment, amusement, and confusion, which gave way to anger and disbelief the more that Americans learned about it. This is understandable. People don't tend to react positively when you threaten to upheave their lives by eliminating their jobs, outlawing their vehicles, and demanding they essentially build their homes to whatever standard bureaucrats in Washington decide. If you ask most Americans if government control over almost every aspect of their lives is the direction they want to see the nation take, the answer is an overwhelming no. Yet that is exactly what the Green New Deal seeks to do under the pretense of ending climate change. The authors of the Green New Deal and its accompanying memo suggest their plan is the cure for all of society's ills. They cast themselves as saviors who will end global warming, income inequality, and oppression in one fell swoop. The Green New Deal will guarantee every American free health care, college tuition, and a job with family-sustaining wage. That last part isn't even required to receive the benefits promised by the Green New Deal. If an able-bodied person is unwilling to look for work, the government would provide, quote, economic security under the plan. What supporters can't say is how they will implement this, what impact it will have on the average American, and where the trillions of dollars that it will cost will come from. These details are important when you're asking for support of a plan that is estimated to cost up to $93 trillion and dramatically expand the federal government's reach into the daily lives of every American. Single moms, seniors, and those living on fixed incomes, the very people that the Green New Deal supporters purport to help, will be the most negatively impacted by this proposal. Getting the majority of our nation's energy from renewable sources is certainly a worthy goal. However, you cannot brand a $93 trillion all-encompassing liberal wish list as an energy plan and expect it to be embraced with no questions asked. Only a fraction of this plan deals with climate change, but its energy mandates are entirely unworkable. The Green New Deal dictates that the nation will rely 100% on renewable power within a decade. Experts say that it's impossible to accomplish this by 2050, much less a constricted 10-year timeline. The way forward to solve our environmental challenges should be driven by positive incentives, research and development, not heavy-handed regulation. The uncomfortable truth for the Green New Deal proponents is that the U.S. is already leading the charge on reducing carbon emissions. We can continue to build on that progress and encourage change within the international community without mandating a government takeover of nearly every sector of our economy. As a member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, I've long advocated an all-of-the-above approach to energy security. This strategy includes wind, renewable biomass, hydroelectric, solar power, and it absolutely needs to include the expansion of nuclear power, which the Green New Deal mysteriously leaves out. These are the right ways to responsibly address our energy needs. The Green New Deal, which makes undeliverable promises, proposes to dramatically drive up costs for every American and eliminates thousands of jobs in the energy sector, is not the way to go. Green New Deal will result in a staggering loss of jobs, redistributes wealth on a scale our nation has never seen before. It calls for a massive government takeover of our nation's economy and culture. And worst of all, it hides all of this in a fanciful energy modernization scheme that can't be achieved in the manner it is written. The Green New Deal is not a serious plan. The Senate should wholeheartedly reject it when it comes before us. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
C-SPAN, where history unfolds daily. In 1979, C-SPAN was created as a